Picture the brightest aisle in an American grocery store. 200 feet of cardboard, stacked shoulder high, every box shouting in a different colour. Tigers, elves, captains, leprechauns, a rooster, a rabbit who is never allowed to eat the product he sells. Now understand what that aisle is actually made of. It's made of a religious health resort in Michigan where millionaires paid to be starved, hosed with cold water, and fed 15 quarts of yogurt a day. It's made of two brothers who invented a flake of grain by accident and then spent more than a decade suing each other over it. It's made of a bankrupt Texan who rolled into town in a wheelchair, watched how the place worked, and walked out with the single most profitable idea in the history of American food. That you don't sell a man breakfast, you sell him his health back, and you print the promise right on the box. And it's made of a cartoon tiger who, in 1952, began teaching 4-year-olds to ask for sugar by its first name. That's the cereal aisle, the happiest looking place in the store, and it was built layer by layer on 100 years of American stomachaches. A place where you could buy salvation in 1898 and pure candy in 1955 in the same box from the same company, sometimes under the same signature. Tonight we're going back through the whole thing, not as shoppers squinting at a nutrition panel. We're going to live it, morning by morning, across 80 years. One burning stomach in 1871, one bell-run day inside the strangest medical institution ever built, one grocery counter in 1908 with a lie printed on every shelf, one Saturday morning in 1955 with a child sitting 3 feet from a television screen. And somewhere along the way we're going to answer the question in the title, because it has a real answer, with names and dates attached. Americans did not drift into eating grain flakes and cold milk. Somebody decided they would. 3 somebodies mainly. By the end of tonight you'll know all 3. One honest note before we start, because tonight I'll be lending you other people's eyes. The buildings in this story are real. The dates are real. The prices are real down to the penny. And every big claim, the lawsuits, the advertisements, the fire, the fortunes, comes from the record. But the ordinary people you'll live inside, the merchant and the patient and the counter clerk and the child in pyjamas, they're composites, stitched together from thousands of real people who never wrote anything down. Real rooms, borrowed eyes, and this particular story has grown myths on it like barnacles. The Kellogg legend especially has been retold so many times that even the family couldn't agree on it under oath. So whenever we hit a spot where the legend and the documents disagree, I'll tell you plainly, that's the deal on this channel. I will always tell you which is which. So, I make these history stories and, honestly, I've given up trying to figure out whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just weirdos who specifically wanted to hear about a doctor who believed breakfast could save your soul and administered yogurt at both ends of his patients. Either way, subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. It starts with pain, not war, not famine, not politics. This whole story, the Isle, the Tiger, the Empire, starts with a very specific, very American pain, and to understand it you have to feel it. So let's put you where it lived. It's a Tuesday morning in February of 1871, and you are a dry goods merchant in Cincinnati, Ohio. 41 years old, and you are already awake before the lamplighter has finished your street, because something inside your chest is on fire. You know the fire well. It has a schedule. It arrives around 4 in the morning, a hot coal lodged somewhere behind your breastbone, and it sits there pulsing while you lie flat on your back in the dark and listen to your wife breathing beside you and try to work out which part of yesterday is punishing you. The pork, probably. or the pie, or the coffee, or the second coffee, or the oysters. It could be any of them, because yesterday, like every day, you ate like a man shoveling coal into a furnace, because that is simply how a man eats. You get up quietly. The floorboards are cold enough to bite through your wool socks. In the washstand mirror, by candlelight, you look grey. Your tongue is coated. There's a sour taste at the back of your throat that no amount of tooth powder ever quite scrubs out. And when you press 2 fingers below your ribs, on the right side, something in there presses back. You have dyspepsia. Everyone you know has dyspepsia. Your business partner has it worse. Your minister preaches through it, one hand braced flat against his stomach at the pulpit like a man holding a door shut. The newspapers call it the national disease, and they are not entirely joking. Foreign visitors write whole chapters about it, about the grey-faced, bolting, groaning American stomach. One British traveller after another tours the United States and comes home with the same 2 observations. The trains are fast, and everyone is digesting something with visible regret. And when I say dyspepsia, I need you to understand what that word held in 1871. This isn't modern heartburn, a thing you fix with a chalky tablet from your pocket. This is a permanent condition of daily life. It's the burning, yes, but also the bloating, the sour risings, the headaches, the gnawing, the constipation that gets discussed at dinner tables with the frankness of weather, the nameless 3 a.m. dread that doctors of the era genuinely believed originated in the stomach lining. It is the price of being American, and almost everyone is paying it. Now come downstairs, because breakfast is being laid, and breakfast is the scene of the crime. The kitchen is already hot. Your cook has been up since 5, and the cast iron stove is roaring. And here is what is coming to your table on this ordinary Tuesday, for an ordinary merchant household. Nothing fancy, nothing celebratory. Beefsteak fried in butter, fried potatoes glistening, ham, eggs, hot biscuits with more butter, buckwheat cakes with molasses, a slice of yesterday's apple pie because pie at breakfast is perfectly normal. In New England they'd look at you sideways for skipping it, and coffee, black and boiled and strong enough to float a horseshoe, of which you will drink 3 cups. That's not a feast. That's Tuesday. That is the documented, ordinary, middle-class American breakfast of the 19th century, and it exists for a reason. 2 generations back, nearly everyone in your family worked a farm. A farm breakfast was fuel for 10 hours of axe and plough labour in open weather, and a farmer could burn through fried pork and buckwheat cakes by noon. The food made sense then. The food stayed when the labour left. You, sitting down to a ploughman's breakfast, will spend today standing behind a counter measuring calico, and the heaviest thing you will lift before supper is a bolt of cloth. You eat it all anyway. Feel this part, because this is where the century lives. The first cut of the steak, the butter running into the potatoes, the crackle of biscuit crust, the molasses roping off the fork, and underneath the pleasure, arriving before you're even finished, the familiar leaden press behind your ribs, like a hand slowly closing. You eat fast, too. Everyone eats fast. Foreign visitors clock American mealtimes in disbelief. 10 minutes, 8 minutes, men at hotel tables with watches open beside their plates. There's even a joke going around that the national motto ought to be gobble, gulp and go. You push back from the table. The fire in your chest has company now, a general heaviness, a thickness behind the eyes. And here comes the object I want you to notice. Notice it carefully, because it's going to follow us through this entire story, changing shape as it goes. From your waistcoat pocket, you take a small brown glass bottle. The label is beautiful. A steel engraving of a bearded fatherly physician, a name with a doctorate attached, and text in 5 sizes of type promising relief from dyspepsia, biliousness, sour stomach, sick headache, nervous exhaustion, and lowness of spirits. You paid 75 cents for it at the druggist's, which is not nothing. A good pair of workman's boots runs $2, and you have no idea what's in it. Nobody does. There is no law anywhere in the United States in 1871 requiring the maker to tell you. What's in most of them, though you won't learn this for another 35 years, is alcohol, sometimes 40 proof and better, occasionally reinforced with opium, which is certainly one way to stop feeling your stomach. You take your spoonful. It burns going down in a way you've decided means it's working. Hold that spoonful in your mind. The fatherly face on the label, the medical-sounding promise, the mystery inside, the 75 cents. That right there, that little transaction, is the seed of everything. Half a century from now, the most successful food company in America will be built by a man who understood exactly why you bought that bottle and who figured out how to put the same promise in a box on a breakfast table. The bottle is the trick in its infant form. Remember it. Walk to work now, because the walk matters too. Cincinnati in 1871 is called Porkopolis, and it earns the name. This city slaughters and packs hundreds of thousands of hogs a year, and on the wrong wind the whole downtown smells like rendering fat, a thick, sweetish, clinging smell that gets into wool, coats, and stays. Meat isn't just on your table. It's the air, it's the economy, it's the wagons of barreled pork rumbling past you on Pearl Street toward the river landing. You live inside a civilization of meat, and your body files a complaint about it every single morning at 4 o'clock. At the shop, your junior clerk is opening the shutters, and you catch yourself doing the arithmetic you always do, because you are a merchant and arithmetic is how you pray. The bottle, 75 cents. You go through perhaps 2 a month, $18 a year, which is more than you pay for your pew at church, spent on a mystery liquid that has never once in 6 years actually fixed you. And you are one dyspeptic man in one city. Multiply your $18 by the grey-faced legions, by every merchant and minister and matron from Boston to St. Louis pressing a hand below the ribs, and you begin to glimpse the size of the pain, in dollars, that is lying around loose in America in 1871, waiting for somebody to pick it up. The patent medicine men picked up their share, but medicine bottles only ever sold the cure. The real fortune, the one that would build the brightest aisle in the grocery store, belonged to whoever thought of selling the prevention, of getting inside the breakfast itself, replacing the steak and the pie and the guilt with something that came sanctified, something a man could eat and feel virtuous about, something scientific. And by the winter of 1871, in a hillside water cure in New York State and a little Adventist town in Michigan, the people who would do exactly that were already at work. They didn't look like businessmen. They looked like prophets. For a long time, that's precisely what they were. To find the first prophet, we have to step back 40 years from your Cincinnati breakfast into the 1830s and meet a thin, intense, frequently unwell Presbyterian minister named Sylvester Graham. You know his name already. Even if you don't know, you know it. It's on the Graham cracker, which is roughly what a saint's relic looks like after 190 years of American commerce. Graham preached against sugar and refined flour, And today his name is stamped on a sweetened cookie and crushed into the bottom crust of cheesecakes. History has a sense of humour, and it is not always kind. But in 1834, nobody was laughing. Graham was one of the most famous lecturers in the United States, and what he preached up and down the eastern seaboard to packed halls was that Americans were destroying themselves at the table. Meat inflamed the body, he said. Spices inflamed it worse. Mustard and pepper, he taught, could drive a person to madness. Coffee and tea were slow poisons. White bread, the fashionable, fluffy, store-bought white bread of the cities, was a fraud against nature, robbed of everything God had packed into the wheat berry, and every wife who did not bake her family's bread at home from coarse, whole, unsifted flour was, he said this from the stage, failing in her duty before heaven. And people listened, not a few cranks, thousands. Graham boarding houses opened in New York and Boston, where lodgers lived by his rules. Cold water, hard mattresses, open windows, 2 plain meals a day, whole grain bread and vegetables, and nothing that had ever had a pulse. Oberlin College put its entire student body on a Grahamite diet for a while in the early 1840s. One professor is said to have been dismissed for the crime of bringing a pepper shaker to the dining hall. Do you follow? A pepper shaker? Fired. That is the temperature at which America was arguing about breakfast 190 years ago. Here's the part I love, the part that tells you food was never really the subject. In 1837, in Boston, Sylvester Graham was nearly mobbed. The city's commercial bakers, men whose white bread he was calling a public fraud, organised to shut down his lecture, and the crowd at his venue got ugly enough that his defenders, so the contemporary accounts say, stood at the upper windows with shovels and buckets of slaked lime to dump on the rioters below. A food riot in Boston over bread philosophy. The line for and against breakfast reform ran hot enough to fight over. It always would. Keep that heat in mind for the whole rest of the night, because there's a version of it in every chapter. This country has never once managed to treat breakfast as just food. It's always a flag. Somebody's always saving your soul with it, and somebody else is always selling you something through it. Graham died in 1851, worn out at 57. Having gotten frailer and frailer on his own regimen, his critics noticed and said so in print with relish. But the movement didn't die with him, because movements this useful never do. It flowed into water-cure sanitariums, into vegetarian societies, into a whole national subculture of health reform that overlapped, snugly, with the era's religious revivals. Clean bowels and clean souls travelled together, and in 1858, one of Graham's most devoted heirs, a tall, bearded, tirelessly certain physician named James Caleb Jackson, took over a hillside establishment in Dansville, New York, renamed it Our Home on the Hillside, and turned it into one of the largest water cure institutions in the world. Come stand in Dansville for a moment, because this is where the first domino actually tips. It's a spring morning in 1864, and this time your borrowed eyes belong to a guest, a pale young schoolteacher from Rochester, sent here by her family for her nerves and her stomach, both of which have collapsed under a diet of boarding house fried everything. The bell wakes you at 5. Everything here happens by bell. You rise in a plain room with the window already open, doctor's orders, night air, which every other physician in America currently believes will kill you, and you go down with the other guests in flannel wrappers to be treated. And treatment means water. Wet sheets wound tight around you like a shroud until you sweat. Sitz baths, douches of cold well water aimed with terrible precision. Feet plunged in one temperature while your head is towelled with another. It is bracing and absurd, and here's what's inconvenient for us moderns to admit. A lot of these people genuinely improve, because whatever the water is or isn't doing, they have also stopped drinking, stopped dosing themselves with opium elixirs, started sleeping, started walking miles of hillside every day, and started eating food that doesn't fight back. But the food is the reason we're here. Dr. Jackson serves 2 meals a day, and his table is Graham's gospel made edible. Unleavened bread, grains, fruit, no meat, no butter, no coffee, no tea, no spice. And in 1863, the year before you arrived, this severe and busy man did something small that history would make enormous. Looking for a convenient health food his guests could eat cold, something that didn't require a cook at the stove at 5 in the morning, he took his coarse Graham flour, mixed it with water, baked it into brittle sheets, broke the sheets into chunks, ground the chunks, and baked them again, double-baked, hard as gravel. He called the result granular, from granules, and it is, by every serious food historian's reckoning, the first manufactured breakfast cereal in American history. Born not in a kitchen, but in a sanitarium. Born not as food, but as treatment. Write that on the inside of your eyelids, because it's the key to this entire story. Cold cereal was invented as medicine. The medicine just happened, eventually, to learn how to taste good. And the moment it did, it stopped being medicine and never looked back. Now, granular itself. You're holding your morning ration of it right now, there in the Dansville dining hall, and I want you to be honest about what's in the bowl, because the guests were. It's rubble. Little tan pebbles of twice-baked Graham paste, and if you bite one dry you will genuinely risk a tooth. People called them wheat rocks, and nobody was being witty, they were being accurate. Granular cannot be eaten as it sits. It has to be drowned. The house instruction is to soak it, in milk or in water, and not for a polite minute but properly at length. The standing joke is that you put it to soak the night before, like beans, like laundry, and eat it at breakfast when it is surrendered. So here is what you actually do, school teacher, on this spring evening in 1864, and I want you to feel the small ceremony of it. Before bed, in your plain room, you spoon the hard little pebbles into a crockery bowl, pour milk over them, and set the bowl on the windowsill where the night air is cool. It sits there in the dark while you sleep, softening, hour by hour under the moon. A bowl of grain, waiting all night on an American windowsill for morning to make it edible. Hold that image. Keep the bowl on the sill. 90 years from now, at the far end of this story, a child in pyjamas is going to fill a bowl from a box in 4 seconds flat. And the entire distance between that child and your windowsill, every fortune, every lawsuit, every lie in this story, is the engineering of that weight down to nothing. The whole industry we're building tonight is, at bottom, a war against that one night of soaking. And the money. Even here, even on the holy hillside, pay attention to the money, because Dr. Jackson certainly did. Granular was made of Graham flour and water, ingredients costing him pennies a pound, and it sold to guests and by mail at a price the trade papers later reckoned at several times its cost. It was not a swindle exactly. It was something subtler, something brand new in the world, and I need you to see it clearly here at its birth. The markup wasn't on the grain. The markup was on the meaning. People weren't paying for baked flour. Baked flour was nearly free. They were paying for sanctified flour. Flour endorsed by a doctor, surrounded by a theory, eaten inside a system that promised to remake you. Grain plus story equals price. That equation, discovered on a hillside in New York in 1863, is the entire breakfast cereal industry in embryo. Everyone else in this story just adds zeros. One more thing happens at Dansville, quietly, and it's the hinge the whole night turns on. Among the visitors who passed through our home on the hillside in September of 1864 is a small, magnetic, formidably serious woman from Michigan named Ellen White, a founder and the guiding prophet of the young Seventh-day Adventist Church. She and her husband James come to Dansville because James's health has broken. She watches the bells, the baths, the 2 plain meals, the grain diet, the whole machinery of righteous health, and she takes careful note of what she likes and what she doesn't. Too much dancing and amusement for her taste, too little scripture, but the core of it, the body as a temple kept clean by regimen that she recognizes. She'd already been teaching her flock something similar. She would describe her health teachings as coming to her in visions, including a sweeping one on Christmas Day, 1865, instructing the church to build a healing institution of its own. And her church obeyed. In September 1866, in a little town in south-central Michigan where the Adventists had their headquarters, they opened the Western Health Reform Institute. 2 frame buildings, a handful of patients, water treatments, and graham bread and prayer. The town was called Battle Creek. Population then, a few thousand souls. Within 40 years, because of what was about to happen inside that little institute, the name Battle Creek would be printed on more breakfast tables than any town name on earth, and freight trains would leave it every day carrying grain flakes to every state in the Union. But in 1866, it's just 2 wooden buildings and a theory. What it needs, what every institution like it needs, is a man to run it. The Whites had already picked one out. He was 14 years old that year, the sickly, brilliant 5'4" son of a local broom maker, and the church would soon be paying to send him to medical school in New York, with the explicit plan that he would come back and take the place over. His name was John Harvey Kellogg, and with him, this stops being a story about food reform and becomes a story about empire. Everything about John Harvey Kellogg was outsized, except John Harvey Kellogg. He stood about 5'4", and at some point in adulthood he began dressing entirely in white. White suit, white shoes, white hat, so that he moved through his own corridors like a small, brisk, freshly laundered ghost. He'd been a frail, half-schooled printer's boy, setting type for Adventist health tracts. The church spotted the mind inside the frail boy, and Ellen White and her husband helped pay to send him east for a real medical degree. He trained at Bellevue Hospital Medical College in New York, genuine, rigorous, big city medicine, surgery and all. And then, in 1876, at the age of 24, he came home to Michigan and took charge of the little Western Health Reform Institute with its handful of patients and its graham bread. The first thing he did tells you everything about him. He renamed it. The word sanatorium existed. A rest place, usually for soldiers or consumptives. Kellogg wanted something that sounded like a system, a science, a destination, so he bent the word into one of his own, sanitarium. He liked to claim in later years that he'd coined it himself, and whether or not the dictionary men would give him full credit, he made it true the only way that matters. For the next half-century, when an American said the san, with no other explanation, they meant one place. Battle Creek. And what he built there, over the next 25 years has no real equivalent before or since. Not a hospital, though it had operating rooms, and Kellogg himself became a genuinely skilled surgeon who performed thousands of operations. Not a spa, though it had baths beyond counting. Not a church, though it ran on one. The SAN was a machine for living correctly. Kellogg's phrase for the philosophy was biologic living. And by the 1880s and 90s, the machine had grown into a small city. A great multi-story main building with long white verandas, room for hundreds of patients at a time, thousands of guests a year at its height, its own farms, its own dairy, its own experimental kitchen, its own printing operation, pushing out Kellogg's magazines and books, of which he wrote nearly 50, sleeping 5 hours a night and dictating to relays of secretaries. The whole gilded world came. Presidents came. Business titans came. Men whose names you know from gas pumps and department stores and automobiles, famous athletes, famous preachers, famous actresses. They came because they were rich. And being rich in Gilded Age America meant eating like a Roman emperor twice a day. And eating like a Roman emperor meant that under the silk waistcoats, the finest people in the United States were carrying the exact same coal of fire behind the breastbone as our Cincinnati merchant. Dyspepsia was the national disease, remember, and the SAN was the national answer. The rich man's version of that 75-cent brown bottle. Except this bottle was the size of a town and you lived inside it. Let's live inside it. One day. Your borrowed eyes now belong to a guest, say, a middle-aged wholesale hardware man from Chicago, prosperous, exhausted, 40 pounds past his wedding weight, sent here in the autumn of 1897 by a wife who has run out of patience with his groaning. Composite man, real routine. Every treatment I'm about to run you through is out of the SAN's own published literature, and that's a sentence I'll be leaning on, because you would not believe me otherwise. You wake in a clean, plain, sunlit room, and the first thing you notice is what's missing. No smell of frying, anywhere. You have woken every morning of your adult life inside a cloud of pork fat and coffee, and its absence is so total it feels like a sound has stopped. What you smell instead is soap, sunlight on waxed floors and faintly hot grain. A bell rings. Everything here happens by bell. You could close your eyes and be back at Dansville, and that is no accident. This place is Dansville's ambitious grandchild. You dress and present yourself because your day is not yours. Your day is a printed schedule, prepared for you personally after your examination, and your examination, on the day you arrived, was unlike anything in your medical experience. You were weighed, measured, and analysed by machines, dynamometers to test the strength of every muscle group, spirometers for your lungs, your heart traced, your blood counted, let's say your interior transit examined with an attention you have never previously commanded from anyone, and questions asked about your bowels of a directness that made you, a hardware man of 50, blush like a bride. Then the verdict, delivered with total confidence, auto-intoxication. This is the doctor's grand theory, the theory the whole SAN turns on, that the American bowel, abused by meat and hurry, has become a slow sewer, poisoning the blood from within, and that nearly every ailment of body and spirit flows from it. Your fatigue, your headaches, your gloom, all of it, says the little doctor in white, begins in the colon. I'll pause the tour here to be fair to history, because this is one of those spots where I owe you the plain truth. Auto-intoxication, as Kellogg preached it, was wrong. Not fraudulent, sincerely, energetically, encyclopedically wrong, and much of respectable medicine flirted with the same idea in that era before abandoning it. Some of what it inspired was pure nonsense, and yet, maddeningly, the prescriptions it generated: eat less meat, eat more fibre, more vegetables, walk, sleep, stop smoking, stop drinking. Read like a modern wellness pamphlet. The little doctor arrived at several right answers by way of a wrong map. History does that more often than either side of any argument likes to admit. Back to your day, hardware man, because the bell won't wait. Breakfast in the great dining hall. Hundreds of guests at white-clothed tables, and at each place a printed bill of fare with your prescribed items marked. There is a science of chewing here. Its champions call it Fletcherizing, after Horace Fletcher, the great masticator, a real man, a friend of the house, who teaches that every mouthful must be chewed until it liquefies, some said 100 times or more. There are chewing songs. I want to be precise. Grown millionaires, in that hall, sang rhythmic songs to pace their chewing. You chew your way through granola. We'll get to that name in a minute. Through Zwieback toast, through a curious flat wheat preparation, through stewed fruit, and you drink a hot brown liquid that is aggressively not coffee, roasted from grain and molasses, which the menu calls a cereal beverage, and which tastes like a barn in November. File that liquid away. A future patient of this establishment is going to get very, very rich on it. Then the day proper, calisthenics in great halls, arms swinging in rows, marching to music, the mechanical horse, an electrified saddle that jounces you at a trot, invented by the doctor himself. There are vibrating chairs, slapping belts, machines to pummel prosperity out of your tissues, baths of every temperature and direction. Electric light cabinets. You sit in a wooden box lined with glowing bulbs and sweat like August. Outdoor walking in all weathers, breathing exercises counted aloud. 15 quarts of water was prescribed in some regimens, and yes, the yogurt. This is the era of Metchnikoff's theories about friendly bacteria, and the doctor has embraced them at both ends, if you take my meaning, with an enema machine capable of heroic volumes, followed by a pint of yogurt administered where yogurt goes and per the doctor's own published system, where it emphatically does not. You are a hardware man from Chicago. You write home to your wife that you are very well and describe none of this. And here's the strange part. The part that matters for everything that follows. It works on you. Not the magic parts. The walking, the sleep, the water, the vegetables, the absence of whiskey and cigars and 4-pound dinners. 3 weeks in, the coal behind your breastbone has gone out. You'd forgotten what its absence felt like. You are lighter, clearer, cheerful in a way you distantly remember from being 20. And therefore, mark this, you become a believer, and when you go home to Chicago you will carry the Sans gospel into your parlour and your church and your lodge, exactly as thousands of other alumni are carrying it into parlours all over America. The Sans' true product was never the baths. It was testimony. It was tens of thousands of prosperous, talkative Americans returning home convinced that grain is righteousness and breakfast is destiny. By the 1890s, the little doctor in white has done something Sylvester Graham never managed from any stage. He has made health food fashionable, aspirational, expensive. All it lacks now is a product, something a believer can buy in Ohio, something with the Sans halo on it that travels in a box. Which brings us, at last, to the other Kellogg. The one history nearly forgot to notice, standing in the shadow of the little white ghost for 25 years, keeping the books. Will Keith Kellogg, WK, was John Harvey's younger brother by 8 years, and if you want to understand everything he did after the age of 46, you need to understand the quarter century before it. He came aboard around 1880 in his early 20s as the Sands bookkeeper, clerk and general dog's body, and he stayed for 25 years, working weeks that he himself totted up at over 100 hours. He kept books, answered the doctor's correspondence, managed the food operations, chased the bills, and by the accounts that survive, took the doctor's imperiousness full in the face daily. The legend, repeated by biographers, though you should take its sharpest details as family lore rather than court record, has the doctor dictating letters to Will while riding a bicycle around the grounds, or from horseback, with Will trotting alongside with his notebook. What is documented is the money and the mood. A salary that stayed insultingly small against the work, no public credit, and a diary in which the younger brother confided in his flat, unliterary hand that he feared he was fated to remain a poor man while the years went by. Here is your second object to hold on to, and it's a quiet one. In the ledgers of the sanitarium, day after day, year after year, W.K. Kellogg signed things. Receipts, orders, correspondence. A plain, careful, slightly stiff signature. The signature of a man whose name meant nothing. On documents nobody kept. In the shadow of a brother whose name meant everything. Watch that signature. Of all the objects in this story, the brown bottle, the bowl on the windowsill, none is going to travel further than that signature. Within 30 years it will be printed in green ink on more pieces of paper than almost any signature in human history, and the man himself will explain with a bookkeeper's dryness exactly why. We'll get there. Through the 1880s and 90s, the brothers ran a food laboratory alongside the SAN, because the doctor's dietary system kept generating engineering problems. Patients with bad teeth couldn't manage Weeback. One elderly patient, the story goes, broke her dentures on it and billed the doctor $10 for the damage, and whether or not that lady and her $10 are literally documented or well-polished lore, the underlying problem was real. The SAN needed grain foods that were digestible, palatable, and portable. The brothers experimented constantly, baking, boiling, grinding, rolling. They already sold a version of Jackson's Hard Pebbles under his own name, Granular, until the old man of Dansville, still alive and still fierce, threatened legal war over it. The Kellogg's renamed theirs Granola, swapping one vowel, and that vowel was the first shot in the breakfast wars, the first proof that in this new industry, the name on the grain was worth suing over. It would not be the last. And then, sometime in 1894, in that experimental kitchen, it happened. The accident. The single most mythologized moment in the history of American food, and I'm going to tell it to you the honest way, which means telling you two stories at once. The story as it's usually told goes like this. The brothers had been trying to make a better wheat food by boiling wheat and forcing it through rollers and getting nothing but gummy sheets of paste. One day, in the polished version, it's because the doctor was called away. In another, because the Sabbath intervened. A batch of boiled wheat got left sitting out for a day or more. By every sensible kitchen standard, it was ruined. Stale, musty, half-spoiled. But waste was sin at the SAN, so they ran the old batch through the rollers anyway. And instead of paste, something extraordinary came off the steel. Each individual wheat berry flattened into its own thin, perfect, separate flake. The standing time, the mistake, had let the moisture spread evenly through each grain. The brothers baked the flakes crisp, and the modern breakfast cereal, the thing itself, the thing in your cupboard right now, existed on Earth for the first time. That's the legend, and its bones are almost certainly true. The boiling, the rollers, the failures, the left-standing batch, the flakes. The year 1894. Here's what I owe you on top of it. The details have myth growing all over them, and we know this for an unusually good reason. The two men who were in the room spent years contradicting each other about it, eventually under oath. John Harvey later told it as his discovery, even, in one late version, as an idea that came to him in a dream, with Will as the hired hands. Will told it as weeks of his own grinding trial and error at the rollers, with the doctor supervising from a comfortable distance and claiming the credit afterward, as he claimed the credit for everything. The truth is locked in a kitchen in 1894 with two dead men who came to hate each other. What the documents do say is this: the patent for flaked cereals and process of preparing same was filed in 1895 and granted in 1896, in John Harvey Kellogg's name alone. Remember who kept the books and who got the patents. The flake itself was the least of what got decided in that kitchen. They called the new food granose, and they sold it through the San and its mail-order faithful, those thousands of alumni parlours all over America, in 10-ounce packages. And here's your arithmetic, because this channel always does the arithmetic. The wheat in a package of granos cost around 1 cent. The package sold for 15 cents, even allowing for baking, boxing and freight. The margin on righteous grain made hardware and dry goods look like charity work. And demand didn't creep, it detonated. Better than 100,000 pounds of flakes went out in the first year to people who'd never set foot in Battle Creek. The Believers network the San had spent 20 years building turned out to be a ready-made national sales force. Grain plus story equals price, and nobody on earth had a story like the San's. And the doctor, this is the part that decided the next 30 years, did not particularly care. Money for its own sake genuinely bored him. Every dollar the food business made he poured back into the San, into new buildings and new machines and new tracts. He refused, on principle and on dignity, to advertise to the general public. A physician hawking food in the newspapers, next to the liver pills and the lightning liniments. Unthinkable. The flake to John Harvey was a medical instrument. To his younger brother, squinting at the ledgers, it was something else. It was the answer to 25 years of a small salary and a smaller title. If only the doctor would let him run it like a business. The doctor would not. So the flake sat there, patented, proven, selling itself politely through the mail, a fortune lying in plain sight, unguarded, in a town filling up with sharp-eyed visitors. By the late 1890s, the brothers had done to corn what they'd done to wheat. Corn flaked differently. Earlier versions went stale and sad, and the breakthrough, which by most accounts was Will's, was to flake only the heart of the kernel and, crucially, to season it. Malt, a little salt, a little sugar. Hold there. Sugar. In the temple of Sylvester Graham's heirs, in the sanctuary of unseasoned righteousness, the bookkeeper had put sugar in the sacred flake. A pinch, a few pounds to the batch, just enough to make the corn taste like more corn. The doctor, when he learned of it, was genuinely appalled. Sugar was on his index of dietary sins, and the brothers fought over that pinch for years. I want you to keep that pinch of sugar in your hand for the rest of the night. It is at this moment, around 1898, the smallest object in our story. A white trace on a golden flake, a compromise between God and the ledger. Watch what it grows into. By the time we reach 1952, that pinch will have swallowed the flake, the box, the company, and the entire childhood of a generation. And the strangest part is that the bookkeeper who first sprinkled it will not live quite long enough to see the tiger. Then came the night the whole town saw the future by firelight. February 18th, 1902, a bitter Michigan winter night, and this time your borrowed eyes belong to a young kitchen girl from the Sands dining service, boarding in a house half a mile from the main building. Someone's shout wakes you. Not a bell this time, a human voice, wrong-pitched, and then the whole boarding house is up, and you're at the cold window scraping frost with the side of your fist, and through the cleared patch you see the horizon burning. The San is on fire. The great wooden palace of health, the verandas, the halls where the millionaires sang their chewing songs, all of it going up at once, a column of orange you can feel on your face through window glass at half a mile, snow on the rooftops between you and it glowing pink, and the sound arriving late and continuous, like a train that never finishes passing. You stand there in a blanket with the other girls, nobody speaking. By morning the main buildings are black bones in trampled snow. The papers reported the marvel that the hundreds of patients got out, nurses and staff carrying invalids down stairwells into the February night, and the town that woke to the smoke understood that the question was not whether the San had burned. It was whether the empire of health was over. It was not over. It rebuilt at a speed that tells you exactly how much money and faith were banked behind it. Within about a year there rose on the site a new San of stone and steel, 6 stories, fireproof, longer than a city block, grander than anything the state had seen. And the little doctor in white walked its marble lobby as if the fire had been merely one more purifying treatment. But something else happened in the glow of that rebuild, and this is the part that changes your grocery store. The fire, the reconstruction, the years of headlines, all of it advertised Battle Creek to the entire country as the city where health was minted. And into that famous little city, in the first years of the new century, poured every fast-talking man in the Midwest with a barrel of grain and a printing budget. They called it the cereal boom, and it looked exactly like a gold rush, except the gold was oats. By 1902, 1903, there were dozens of cereal companies operating in and around Battle Creek. Count them in the old directories and you pass 40 without slowing down, with names engineered to borrow the Sands halo. Every other box shouted flakes, health, vital, malted, sanitary. Companies formed whose entire assets were a rented barn and a stock certificate. Some never produced a single flake, they produced shares. Ordinary people mortgaged houses to buy into breakfast the way a later America would buy into radio, then bowling alleys, then dot-coms. And when the froth blew off, a few years on, most of those companies were gone. But the noise had done something permanent. It had taught the whole United States that breakfast came from Battle Creek, in a box, with a promise printed on it. Standing in the middle of all this, watching lesser men get rich on a cracked version of his own family's invention, was W.K. Kellogg, still keeping his brother's books, now in his mid-40s, jaw getting squarer by the fiscal quarter. In 1906, he finally moved. He was 46 years old. Pause on that. Everyone sleeping to this who fears their chance has passed. The man whose name is on the most famous breakfast in the world did not start his company until 46, after a quarter-century of being treated approximately like a piece of office furniture. He manoeuvred the cornflake rights out of his brother's tangle of companies, took on investors, and that February founded the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company in a modest plant on Bartlett Street. He kept his pinch of sugar over the doctor's standing horror. And then he did the thing his brother considered beneath the dignity of medicine, the thing the doctor had forbidden for a decade. He advertised. Not politely, massively, recklessly, brilliantly. Within a year or two, he was betting sums on single advertising campaigns that exceeded the company's worth, and one summer's stunt tells you the flavour of the man. A campaign that instructed the housewives of America to wink at their grocer and see what happened. What happened, if you winked, was a free sample box of cornflakes. It sounds like nonsense. It multiplied sales in the cities where it ran many times over and passed instantly into advertising legend. But his masterstroke, the one that fires an object we've been carrying since the ledgers, was smaller and stranger. Battle Creek in 1906 was a hall of mirrors, dozens of cornflakes, many of them draping themselves in the Kellogg aura. And one of the loudest operations trading on the family name was the doctor's own. So the bookkeeper reached for the only instrument of authenticity he had spent 25 years practicing. He put his signature on the box, printed in flowing script, on every single package. None genuine without this signature. W.K. Kellogg. The signature that had spent a quarter-century authorizing invoices. Nobody read now authorized breakfast for a nation. Think about what was actually being sold in that gesture, because it's the quietest trick in this whole story of tricks. Not corn, not crispness, provenance. Trust me personally, said the script on the cardboard, in an industry crawling with imposters. It worked so well that the signature became the logo, and the logo became the company. And to this day, more than a century later, the red script on the box in your cupboard is that bookkeeper's handwriting, or its direct descendant. The most reproduced autograph in the history of the human race, and it belongs to the brother nobody noticed for 25 years. The doctor noticed now. What followed was one of the ugliest family wars in American business history. John Harvey, incandescent that his own brother was selling sugared flakes to the vulgar public under the sacred name, began marketing rival products under his own Kellogg branding. Will sued. The doctor countersued. And the brothers, who between them had built the healthiest place in America, spent the better part of a decade, from 1908 into 1920, trying to take the family name away from each other in front of judges. It went all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court, and in 1920 the court gave its answer. The name, for commercial purposes, belonged to Will. The bookkeeper owned the word Kellogg. The doctor kept his san, his patients, his tracts, his 50 books, and had to watch for the rest of his long life. His own surname means cereal instead of medicine, in a signature that wasn't his. They were never reconciled. Not really. They lived on in the same small city for decades, two old men a few miles apart, communicating through lawyers and occasional stiff notes. Near the very end, the story goes, and this one rests on late recollections, so take it as the family's memory rather than gospel. The dying doctor wrote his brother a long letter of something like apology, and the letter reached Will, whose eyes by then had failed, only after it was too late for answering. Both brothers lived to 91, on the regimen, which is either an advertisement for biologic living or proof that spite is a preservative. History declines to say which. But we've run ahead of ourselves because the cornflake and the signature are only half of 1906's story. The honest half, more or less. The other half, the half that actually answers the question in the title of this episode, checked into the sanitarium 15 years earlier. A gaunt, ruined salesman from Texas wheeled through the Sands front doors in an invalid's chair, with 90 days of the doctor's treatments ahead of him, and waiting undiscovered inside him the most dangerous talent in the history of American breakfast. His name was Charles William Post. It's time you met the man who tricked you. Rewind to 1891, while the wheat is still unflaked, and look at what the wheelchair carries through the Sands front doors. C.W. Post is 36 years old, and he has failed at nearly everything a restless American could fail at in the Gilded Age. Born in Springfield, Illinois in 1854, farm implements salesman, inventor, and genuinely gifted at it, with patents to his name on ploughs and cultivators, and a smokeless cooking stove and even suspenders, real estate ventures in Texas, and running underneath all of it like a crack in a foundation, a nervous constitution that kept giving way. Breakdowns, the era called them, and the era's medicine had nothing for them but rest and brown bottles. By 1891, the latest collapses finished him. He cannot work, can barely digest, and he arrives in Battle Creek gaunt and grey, pushed in that invalid's chair by his wife Ella to put himself in the hands of the most famous doctor in America. He spends the better part of a year under this Sands roof. The bells, the baths, the mechanical horse, the chewing, the cereal beverage that tastes like a barn in November. He takes the whole catechism, and I want you to picture him taking it. Because this is the pivot of the entire night. A born salesman, flat on his back with nothing to do for month after month except watch the most successful health institution on earth operate on him. Watch it convert pain into faith, and faith into revenue. Watch rich men line up to drink imitation coffee and thank the little doctor for the privilege. Whatever else was failing in C.W. Post, the part of his brain that understood selling was lying there the whole time, wide awake, taking notes. And the treatments don't cure him. 9 months of biologic living, and by the family's own account he was still wasting. Down toward a skeletal weight, his prospects a coin flip. There's a story told about the end of his stay. It appears in most tellings of this tale, and I give it to you flagged as legend, because it's too perfect to check. That Post, broke, offered to pay his sand bill by putting his salesman's gifts to work, advertising the doctor's foods, and that John Harvey Kellogg, with all the disdain of a physician for a drummer, turned him down flat. If it happened, it may be the most expensive refusal in the history of American commerce. If it didn't, it might as well have, because everything that follows behaves exactly as if it did. What's documented is where the wheelchair rolled next. Across town, to a Christian Science practitioner named Elizabeth Gregory, who taught the ruined salesman a completely different medicine. That illness was error, that the mind ruled the body, that he could simply decide to be well. And C.W. Post, who could sell anything, discovered the one customer he'd never tried, himself. He got up. He ate, the story says a hearty meal, against every rule the San had drilled into him. And he did not die. He gained weight. He walked. Within months the invalid was a functioning man again. Make of the mechanism what you will. Post made everything of it. He had learned, in his own body, the lesson that would organize the rest of his life and, in due course, your cereal aisle. That belief is the active ingredient, not the grain, not the water cure, the story you swallow with it. By 1892, he'd opened his own little health establishment in Battle Creek La Vita Inn, a sort of budget san where the treatment was mostly mental science and encouragement. And he wrote a book. He titled it, with the subtlety that would make him rich, "I am well." It didn't set the world on fire. Institutions were slow. Institutions needed patience to come to Michigan. And somewhere in these years, the full shape of the idea assembled itself in him. The idea the little doctor had been sitting on for a decade and was too dignified to use. You don't bring the sick man to Battle Creek. You mail Battle Creek to the sick man. In a box, with a promise printed on the outside. In 1895, in a little white barn on a Battle Creek backlot, with a second-hand roaster, a peanut roaster by most accounts, and a working capital that biographers put in the tens of dollars. Call it the price of a good horse. C.W. Post began manufacturing his first product. He'd tasted it at the San roasted wheat and bran and molasses boiled into a brown beverage. The San called its version a cereal coffee and served it as medicine. Post called his version postum, put his own name inside the product itself. Mark that. The bookkeeper across town wouldn't put his signature on a box for another 11 years, and took it to the grocers of America with an advertising campaign unlike anything food had ever seen. Because here's what Post understood that no food man before him understood. The thing he'd absorbed through 9 months of treatments and one miraculous recovery. You do not advertise the product. You advertise the disease. Postum's advertisements barely mentioned taste. They were about coffee, and they were terrifying. Coffee, said the advertisements, was why you couldn't sleep. Coffee was why your hands trembled and your stomach burned and your nerves frayed and your work suffered. Post invented ailments with the fluency of a man who'd spent 20 years naming farm equipment. Coffee heart, coffee neuralgia, coffee nerves. He wrote the copy himself in a confiding, doctorly, utterly assured voice. "Is your yellow streak the coffee habit?" one ad demanded. Another purred the slogan that became a national catchphrase. "There's a reason." "A reason you feel the way you feel at 3 a.m, said the small print, "and the reason is in your cup, and the remedy costs 15 cents at your grocer's. Our Cincinnati merchant from 1871, with a brown bottle and as fatherly engraved physician. Do you see it now?" Post had taken the patent medicine label, the oldest trick on the druggist's shelf, and moved it onto food. The bottle didn't disappear. It became a box. Did I mention postum was roasted grain and molasses? It cost Post, by the reckonings of the time, somewhere around 2 cents a package to make. It sold for 15. When a competitor market got sticky, he'd run his famous maneuver. Introduce the identical product under a plain name, Monk's Brew, at a nickel, collapse the local competition, then let Monk's Brew quietly vanish while postum resumed at full price. The man could play a grocery shelf like a church organ. Within 3 years, the invalid from the wheelchair was clearing, this figure is in the standard accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, on his way to $1 million annually before the new century was well begun. From a barn, from roasted wheat, from fear of coffee. And in 1897 came the masterpiece. Post took wheat and malted barley, baked the dough slowly until the starches turned sweet and hard, ground the result into nubbly golden granules. Dr. Jackson of Dansville would have recognized the method instantly, and historians have noted the family resemblance ever since. And he named it grape nuts. There are no grapes in grape nuts. There are no nuts in grape nuts. The grape, Post explained, was for the grape sugars formed in baking. The nuts was for the flavour. What there was a name that sounded like nature itself. Health you could hear, and behind the name the full artillery of the Post method. Grape nuts wasn't sold as delicious, it was sold as treatment. The advertisements, his own pen again, recommended it for ailment after ailment, and they climbed, year over year, to claims that should take your breath away a little, even now, even knowing everything modern advertising has done since. Grape nuts as brain food. Grape nuts to steady the nerves and build red blood. Makes red blood ran right there in the copy on a box of baked wheat. Grape nuts for consumption. And, say this one slowly, grape nuts advertised as a food that could make the surgeon's knife unnecessary for appendicitis. Appendicitis. A condition that kills people when knives don't reach it in time. And the ad copy suggested a breakfast food instead of a surgeon. We'll meet that particular claim again shortly in a courtroom, and I'd ask you to remember exactly how it felt to hear it. Inside every package, Post tucked a little pamphlet. His own composition, of course. It was called The Road to Wellville. A few dozen small pages of health counsel and mind cure and gentle salesmanship, folded in with the granules so that the food arrived wrapped in its own scripture. Take that pamphlet in your hands and feel what it is, because it's our fifth object, the last gun on the mantle, a box of grain that came with the reading material telling you what the grain meant. Dr. Jackson had needed a whole hillside institution to wrap meaning around granular. Dr. Kellogg needed the marble sand roll. C.W. Post got the entire cathedral down to a leaflet that cost him a fraction of a cent, printed by the million. The genius of it is total, and so is the cynicism, and the American public answered it with their whole hearts and their whole pocketbooks. By 1902 or so, C.W. Post, the man the sand couldn't cure, 9 years off the wheelchair, was one of the richest men in the United States, with a personal income the papers put at $1 million a year and climbing, a factory district of his own in Battle Creek, and later, a whole town founded and named for him on the Texas plains. Post City, Texas. It's still there. You can drive through it tonight. So now you know what the boomtown con men of 1902 were actually imitating. Not the Kellogg's. The Kellogg's at that point still wouldn't advertise. They were imitating Post. 40 companies with health promises on their boxes, and every one of them was running some dilution of the Post method. Name a fear, print a cure, wrap it around grain marked up 700%. The little doctor in white had built the faith. The bookkeeper would build the brand. But the machinery connecting an American's private 4 a.m. pain to a 15-cent box on a grocer's shelf, the actual trick named in the title of this episode, that was Post's, and by the time Will Kellogg printed his first signature in 1906, the trick was already a national institution, which means it's time to go see the trick working, at the counter, at eye level, where it always worked best. It's a raw grey October morning in 1908, and your borrowed eyes now belong to a grocery clerk, 17 years old, in a town along the railroad in Indiana, second year behind the counter of a corner grocery that smells of coffee beans, kerosene, vinegar barrel, and the cold dirt floor of the back room. Your hands already know the work. The twine that bites your finger when you snap it, the scoop buried in the cracker barrel, the paper you fold and tuck around a pound of butter, in one motion your boss made you practice for a week. But the barrels are dying and you know it because you're the one who dusts what's killing them. Behind you, on the good shelves, at eye level, your boss is exact about the shelf. Eye level is money. Stands the new America. Boxes, rows and rows of printed cardboard, Kellogg's toasted cornflakes with a flowing green signature, Post Toasties, grape nuts by the case, Postum, shredded wheat from Niagara Falls, Quaker Oats with the smiling man in the black hat, and a second rank of boomtown survivors. Malta Vita, Ego-C, names like tonics. 10 years ago, this section was one bin of oatmeal, sold loose, scooped by weight into a sack, and nobody asked its opinion on anything. Now it's a choir wall of coloured cardboard, and every single box is saying something. Claims, slogans, doctors' faces, sheaves of wheat lit like altar paintings. Your boss calls the shelf the preachers, and he doesn't smile when he says it. Feel the transaction that's coming, because it happens every morning and it's the whole era in miniature. The bell over the door. A woman comes in out of the cold. A railroad man's wife, you know her. 3 children, husband with a stomach like a Cincinnati merchant's, which is to say a stomach like everyone's. 20 years ago, her mother stood at a stove at 5 a.m. frying pork and stirring mush for 45 minutes over a coal fire she'd banked the night before. This woman has a coal stove too, and a wash day, and a mending basket, and no hired girl. She stops in front of the preachers, and she reads, lips moving slightly. And then she asks you, 17, in an apron, the question American women are asking clerks all over the country in 1908, and I want you to hear exactly how it's phrased. Not which is tasty, not which is cheap. She taps the shelf and says, which one of these is the one that's good for the blood? Because that's what the box told her to want. She read Makes Red Blood off an advertisement in her own parlour, in a magazine, next to fiction and needlework patterns, in the same confiding doctor's voice as the sermons on coffee. Her husband groans at night. The box in your hand says it knows why, and it costs 15 cents, which is a good deal less than a doctor's visit at $1, and asks no humiliating questions about his bowels. You hand it across the counter. She pays. Inside, folded against the granules, rides the little pamphlet, The Road to Wellville, which she will actually read tonight, by lamplight, and partly believe, because it is written to be partly believed. That's a wheat product and a leaflet, son, your boss says after the bell rings her out, and somewhere a man in Battle Creek just made 13 cents on your 15. He's not bitter about it. That's the strange part. There's a kind of professional awe in his voice. He worked provisions 30 years, sold flour by the barrel at margins thin as the paper it was weighed on, and he has watched these Michigan men teach the country to pay 7 prices for the same wheat, because the cardboard talks. One evening, counting the drawer, he gives you the sentence you'll repeat for the rest of your life, and it's the truest thing anyone says in this whole story. We don't sell food anymore, son. We sell what the box says about the food. And the box, he adds, tapping the signature, the box will say anything. Except, and here the story turns, right about the year you're standing in. The country had begun, at last, to talk back. It started with the bottles. In 1905 and 1906, the muckraking press, above all Collier's Weekly, with its towering expose series The Great American Fraud, tore the patent medicine industry open on the national doorstep, printed the actual contents of the beloved brown bottles, the alcohol, the opiates, the nothing, named names, showed the fatherly engraved physicians to be inventions of the advertising department. Our merchant's 75-cent bottle from 1871, 35 years on, America finally got to see inside it, and the revulsion helped drive the Pure Food and Drug Act through Congress in 1906, the first federal law to insist that labels stop lying, at least about what was in the package. The bottle as a trick was dying. But we've already established where the trick had moved. It had moved onto the cereal shelf, and the same magazine that had gutted the patent medicines looked over at the breakfast boxes making medical promises, and at the biggest promiser of them all. In 1907, Collier's took direct aim at C.W. Post's advertising, at Grapenut's copy insinuating that a breakfast food could stand between a patient and appendicitis, the claim I asked you to remember. The magazine called it what it was, in print, in plain Anglo-Saxon, a lie that could kill somebody who believed it in place of a surgeon. Post, who had never in his life absorbed a blow without swinging back twice as hard in 6-point type, bought space and attacked the magazine itself, and Collier sued him for libel. The case ground through the courts for 3 years, and in 1910 a jury gave its verdict, against Post, $50,000. Now $50,000 to C.W. Post was, arithmetically, a few weeks of postdom. The verdict was later trimmed on technical grounds, and no court order ever really slowed the company. But something else happened in that courtroom that mattered more than the sum. And it's why this episode's title says tricked instead of persuaded. The trick got named. Under oath, in public, on the record, the distance between what the box said and what the wheater did was measured out loud, and the measurement was printed in the same magazines that had carried the original ads. The advertisement softened after that, slowly, grudgingly, the appendicitis vanishing from the copy, the cures fading into vaguer glows of vigour and sunshine. The industry was learning the lesson it has never since forgotten and never since stopped exploiting. You can no longer say the box will heal them. You must make them feel it will, while the print promises nothing. Modern advertising, the kind that surrounds you tonight, was born precisely there, in the gap between those two sentences. As for the man himself, C.W. Post's last years read like one of his own dark advertisements, and I'll walk you through them gently, because this channel doesn't linger where it doesn't need to. He got richer still. He built his Texas town, fought the unions bitterly, fired cannon and detonated dynamite kites over the plains to shake rain out of a dry sky. That's documented, rain-making by bombardment, and it tells you the confidence of the man. Sometimes it even rained. And in the early spring of 1914, at 59, the great enemy of surgeons was struck down by, history is not a subtle author, appendicitis. A special train rushed him across the country to the Mayo Brothers in Minnesota, the finest knives in America, and the operation succeeded. The recovery didn't. Weakened, exhausted, sunk in the nervous darkness that had chased him since the wheelchair, the darkness no product of his ever touched. C.W. Post died by his own hand at his home in Santa Barbara that May. The empire passed in time to his daughter Marjorie, 27 years old, who would grow it into the General Foods Corporation and become one of the wealthiest women of the American century. The little pamphlet in the boxes had promised a road to Wellville. Its author never found the place. I'd rather you heard that from me plainly than dressed up as a moral. Some stories don't owe us a lesson. They just ask to be remembered accurately. And Battle Creek rolled on without him. That's the cold, quiet fact of the trick. And it's the reason we're only halfway through this night. By the time Post died in 1914, and the brothers' lawsuits burned toward their 1920 verdict, and the old doctor in white preached on in his marble san, the machine no longer needed any of its inventors. The habit had taken. Somewhere between 1895 and the First World War, without a vote, without quite noticing, Millions of American households had simply stopped cooking the morning meal. The stove stayed cold till noon. The pan hung on its hook. Grain, box, milk, done. City families first, then the towns along the railroads, then everywhere. When war came and the government itself preached wheatless days and simpler tables, the box was ready and waiting to be patriotic too. The question American breakfast had asked for 300 years, "What shall we cook?" had been replaced permanently by the question your grocery aisle still asks tonight. Which box? The first trick sold the box to the mothers on fear, and we've now watched it work from every side. But the men in Battle Creek had a problem the founders never anticipated. Fear of dyspepsia doesn't pass to the next generation. The railroad man's wife believed because her husband groaned at 4 a.m. Her children grew up on flakes. Their stomachs never learned to groan, and a customer with nothing wrong is a customer with no reason to be loyal. Somewhere in the offices of Battle Creek between the wars, the industry began to grope toward its second great discovery. The one this episode's title is really about. The one that would make the first trick look gentle. If you cannot sell health to the mother anymore, sell something else. To someone else. Someone with no money at all and total power over the grocery list. Someone 3 feet tall. To watch it happen, we need the sound that made it possible. We need a living room, a Saturday, and a small glowing screen. But screens come last. First came the song. Christmas Eve, 1926, radio station WCCO, Minneapolis. A men's quartet leans into a microphone and actually sings in barbershop harmony, a question at the listening Midwest. Have you tried Wheaties? It is, by the standard histories of the business, the first singing commercial in American broadcasting. And it existed because Wheaties, a bran flake General Mills predecessor had launched in 1924, was dying on the shelf. After the song, it stopped dying. The company noticed, with the delicacy of a wolf noticing a limp, that the cities where the jingle aired were the cities where the boxes moved, and a truth entered the industry's bloodstream that has never left it. Cereal is not sold by the tongue, cereal is sold by the ear. Think about what that means, and think about who owns the ears. An advertisement in a magazine needed a reader, an adult holding the purse, but a song on the radio pours into every skull in the parlour, and it pours easiest into the youngest ones. Any parent tonight knows this with weary certainty. A jingle heard twice lives in a 6-year-old forever. The bells of Dansville, the bells of the San, the sound that once summoned grown believers to righteous grain, had found their final form, and the final form was a tune aimed under the age of 10. The industry spent the 1930s learning the register. Wheaties bought sponsorship of a radio adventure serial called Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, and taught a generation that box tops were currency. Send in 2, receive a whistling ring. Kellogg's Rice Krispies, launched in 1928, hired 3 elves named Snap, Crackle, and Pop, whose entire sales pitch was that the cereal talks to you, which tells you the target audience was people young enough to want breakfast that talks. The mothers still bought the boxes, but increasingly the boxes were speaking over the mothers' heads, straight down, to the small person in the other chair. One thing the boxes did not yet say out loud was sugar. The pinch was still a pinch, flavouring, seasoning the bookkeeper's old compromise. The first man to stop pinching was not one of the giants. In 1939, a Philadelphia businessman introduced a children's cereal called Ranger Joe, puffed wheat glazed in honey and sugar, candy-coated grain sold frankly as a sweet. The giants watched. The war intervened, sugar was rationed, the idea waited. And then in 1949, with rationing gone, and the greatest baby boom in the country's history filling America's high chairs, Post, the company of grape nuts, the company built on Make's red blood, took Ranger Joe's idea and industrialized it. Sugar crisp, puffed wheat under a sugar glaze, with 3 cartoon bears on the box. It was a detonation. Within months, every major player was racing into pre-sweetened cereal, and in 1952, Kellogg's, the house the temperance of John Harvey built, put its own cornflake under a white frost of sugar, and named the result, with total commercial honesty, sugar-frosted flakes of corn. Nobody was pinching now. In the sweetest of the new cereals, sugar wasn't an ingredient. It was the majority. Analyses in the decades that followed would clock the leaders at 40, 50, in the worst cases better than 50% sugar by weight. Read that back against everything we've walked through tonight. The sacred flake, the temple of unseasoned grain, Graham's congregation ready to riot over white bread. And now the flake was, by weight, half candy, and the box had the nerve to still be standing in the aisle called breakfast, wearing the same signature. W.K. Kellogg had died, 91 and blind, only months before the frosted flake shipped. The pinch he'd once defended against his outraged brother had grown until it swallowed the company. Neither brother lived to hear the tiger speak. Both died. The doctor in 1943, the bookkeeper in 1951, with the trademark war won and lost, and the war for the children just beginning. Because 1952 didn't just bring the sugar, it brought the salesman. Kellogg's ran a little contest among cartoon characters to front the new frosted flakes. The also-rans included a kangaroo named Katie and an elephant, and the winner was a tiger named Tony, who within a couple of years acquired the booming velvet voice of a singer named Thurl Ravenscroft and a 2-word catechism. "They're great," that would outlive everyone who approved it. And Tony did not arrive alone, because the small glowing screen had arrived first. Between 1950 and 1955, television went from a rich family's toy to a piece of furniture in most American living rooms, the fastest conquest of any machine in the country's history to that point. And the cereal companies, the original geniuses of selling through sound, understood the new instrument before almost anyone. They didn't just buy advertisements, they bought the shows. Kellogg's money put Superman on the air. The Man of Steel spent the 1950s personally endorsing cornflakes between rescues, and within a few years, an entire cartoon studio's output. Hanna-Barbera's Huckleberry Hound existed because a cereal company paid for him to exist. The other giants did the same, and all of it, as the tigers, the elves, the superheroes, the bears, was scheduled with actuarial precision into the one-time slot when the audience was purest. Saturday morning, when the parents of America slept in and the children of America woke at dawn, alone with the set. Go there now. Last vignette of the night, and the gentlest. It's a Saturday in October 1955. A tract house outside Columbus, Ohio, and your borrowed eyes belong to a boy, 6 years old, in flannel pajamas with cowboys on them. You wake in grey light before anyone else in the house is breathing loud. No bell wakes you. No church bells. No sanitarium gong. No mother calling. The sound that pulls you down the hall on sock feet is silence itself. The promise of the one morning that belongs entirely to you. The living room is cold, the furnace not up yet. The linoleum in the kitchen is a plate of ice under your socks. You drag a chair from the dinette. It screeches, you freeze, nobody stirs, and you climb it to the cupboard, and there it is. The box. It's your box. Your mother bought it because you asked for it by name, in the store aisle, in the exact words the tiger taught you. And if some part of her wondered when her 6-year-old had memorized a sales script, she was outnumbered. Every child in the aisle was reciting one. Feel the box, because 100 years of this story are engineered into the 8 seconds that follow. The cardboard's dry rasp, the top flap tearing open along its glued seam, that soft rip that means Saturday in half the houses on this street, the waxed inner bag crackling like quiet fire. You tip it, and the flakes avalanche into the bowl with a hiss, frost catching the kitchen's grey light. And listen, no soaking, no windowsill, no night of waiting, no stove, no fire to bank, no cook-up since 5. The school teacher at Dansville stood 91 years ago with her crockery bowl on the sill, waiting for the moon to soften her wheat rocks. You are 6, alone, and you have assembled a complete American breakfast in less time than it takes the refrigerator door to swing shut on the milk. That distance, sill to cupboard, overnight to instantly, medicine to candy, is the whole industry. You are the finish line of every fortune in this story, and you know none of it. You know it's sweet and it's yours. You carry the bowl to the living room 3 feet from the television and turn the knob. The set hums, warms, blooms grey-blue, cartoons, and between the cartoons, every few minutes all morning by design, the salesman, the tiger, the bears, the elves. A cheerful parade of painted animals, each one looking straight out through the glass at you, 6 years old, cross-legged, spoon in hand, and speaking to you with a warmth and directness that, be honest, not many adults in 1955 spend on small boys at 7 in the morning. They know your name isn't in the room, so they call you the next best thing. Hey, kids! And you answer with your attention, which is the only currency you have and the only one they need. Nobody in the history of selling, not Jackson with his hillside, not the doctor with his marble lobby, not Post with his $1 million a year in fear. Nobody ever got a cleaner shot at a customer, too young to doubt, too loyal to switch, and armed with the one weapon no advertisement had ever possessed before. A voice inside the buyer's own house saying, please, saying the brand name, saying it again at the exact hour the grocery list was being written. That's the second trick. And notice how different it is from the first, and how much simpler. Post's trick took a wheelchair, a theology, and a decade of genius. Convince a suffering adult that grain is medicine. The television trick fit on an index card. Make the customer before the customer can think. The industry's own men said the quiet part in trade journals as the decade rolled on, that the child was the family's purchasing agent for cereal, that brand loyalty planted before 7 could last for life. Planted before 7. That was the business plan, in print, in their own words. 60-odd years earlier, a doctor in white had rung bells to summon millionaires to unseasoned wheat, in the sincere belief that he was saving their souls. Now the bells rang out of a picture tube at 6-year-olds, summoning them to frosted corn, in the sincere belief that they would still be buying it at 40. And here is the coldest, most admiring thing I can say about the whole apparatus. Both bells worked. You, listening tonight, if you have ever, as a grown adult, in a weak and comfortable hour, bought the cereal of your childhood and eaten it standing in the kitchen, you have felt the second trick complete itself on schedule. Decades after the men who designed it were dust. It wasn't the flake calling you, it was Saturday. They boxed Saturday. That was the product all along. The boy in Ohio finishes his bowl and tips it to drink the milk, which has gone sweet and faintly pink, and this, the flavoured milk at the bottom, the last swallow of the ritual, his grandmother would have called dessert. He calls it breakfast because everyone in the kitchen aisle of history agreed to call it that, and no one asked him. There's one piece left before we can assemble the answer and let the night wind down, because the tiger explains the child and Post explains the mother, but neither quite explains the stove. Something had to happen in the American kitchen itself to the woman standing in it, for the cooked breakfast, 300 years of it, to go out like a lamp. That something had a slogan, and the slogan, when you finally hear it after everything we've walked through tonight, will sound less like grocery advertising and more like a peace treaty. Start with what the cooked breakfast actually cost, because we've been eating it all night without ever paying the bill. Go back one last time to that Cincinnati kitchen in 1871. But this time don't sit down at the table, stand at the stove. The merchant's cook has been up since 5, and before a single egg cracked, she did an hour of pure industrial labour, hauled the ash pan, laid the fire, coaxed the cast iron up to heat you can't dial, you can only feed and guess. Then the steak, the potatoes, the batter, the biscuits, the coffee. 45 minutes of standing work in a room that will hit 90 degrees by 7 a.m. in summer. Grease spitting at her forearms, and after the family rises from the wreckage, another 40 minutes of scouring pans with sand soap in water she also hauled. Call it 2.5 hours of one woman's morning, every morning forever, to produce 15 minutes of eating. The merchant households hired that labour. But most American women were the labour in their own kitchens, unpaid 7 days a week. And even the households that hired it were losing it, because from the 1890s onward, the servant girls of America were walking out of kitchens into shops and factories and offices, decade after decade, and not coming back. The trade papers called it the servant problem. The woman left standing alone at the stove called it Tuesday. Now hear the boxes again, with that stove in your ears. From the very beginning, from the first grape nuts and cornflakes campaigns of the 1900s, alongside all the blood and appendix theology, the cereal men had been running a second, quieter argument, aimed not at the eater's stomach, but at the cook's shoulders. No cooking. Ready to serve, just add milk. Early Kellogg's copy spelled it out in so many words. No kitchen slavery in summer, breakfast without the stove. And unlike Makes Red Blood, this claim had the great advantage of being completely true. The box really did do in 8 seconds what the stove did in 2 hours. Post had sold escape from imaginary coffee poison. This was escape from real, aching, documented drudgery, the one honest miracle in the whole carton. And American women, who were not fools and never had been, took the deal in the tens of millions. Historians of the household will tell you the cold quick breakfast was being adopted fastest exactly where women's mornings were tightest. Cities, boarding houses, homes without help. The mothers weren't only tricked, and it matters to say so plainly in an episode with tricked in the title. On this one point, the mothers were liberated by men who would cheerfully have sold them anything, but who happened, this once, to be selling something real. Time. Roughly 2 hours of it, every single day, handed back. What the 20th century American woman did with those reclaimed hours, work, school, votes, everything, is a different episode. But the cereal aisle was one of the quiet engines under all of it, and that deserves saying in the same breath as everything else it did. The old breakfast did not go quietly, though, and the counterattack is one of the great dark jokes of advertising history. By the 1920s, cold cereal and toast and juice had cut so deep into the American morning that the meat packers were in real pain, and one of them, the Beechnut Packing Company, hired a young publicity man in New York to do something about bacon. The young man was Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, and what he did has been taught in marketing classrooms ever since. He did not advertise bacon. He went to a physician and posed a leading question. Isn't a heavy breakfast more healthful than a light one? And had that physician write to thousands of colleagues and collected the agreeable answers and delivered the result to the newspapers of America as science news. Doctors urge hearty breakfast. Bacon and eggs, the story practically wrote itself, is the all-American breakfast. Sales rose. So now hold the full picture in your hands, because this is the state of the American morning by the late 1920s. On one side of the table, a bowl of flakes invented by a religious sanitarium and sold with invented diseases. On the other, a plate of bacon and eggs canonized as traditional by a survey engineered in a Manhattan office. Both breakfasts were advertisements. The entire American morning, both flanks of it, everything your grandparents ever told you was the normal way to start a day. All of it was copy, written by somebody for money, within living memory. Nobody's breakfast was innocent. Nobody's breakfast had ever been just breakfast. You were simply born into the crossfire and told it was tradition. The boxes side had the better machines, though, and the machines kept coming. In 1926, the Toastmaster, the first successful automatic pop-up toaster for homes, went on sale, and sliced packaged bread followed within a couple of years, and now the entire non-cereal half of breakfast had also become a push-button affair. Electric percolators, refrigerators instead of ice boxes, which meant cold, fresh milk waiting at dawn without a delivery or a trip to the cellar. Orange juice, first squeezed, then canned, then frozen concentrate after the war, completed the trinity. Look at what has assembled itself by mid-century, appliance by appliance, box by box, a breakfast with no fire in it. None. 300 years of American mornings had begun with a woman kneeling at a firebox, and now the entire meal, cereal, toast, coffee, juice, ran on switches and cardboard and the cold chain. The sans old dream, breakfast without cooking, had come true wall to wall, and not because the doctor's theology won. Be as the electric grid and the cereal box and the time-starved American woman had formed an alliance the theology never dreamed of. The San itself, by the way, did not live to see the victory. The doctor built his last great monument in 1928. A 14-story tower addition, the Towers, with room for well over 1,000 guests. The biggest thing between Detroit and Chicago, people in Battle Creek like to say. And 11 months later, the stock market took his clientele away, and the great marble machine sank slowly through the depression into receivership. And in 1942, the army bought the buildings for a military hospital. The temple died. The groceries it hatched conquered the earth. There's a sermon in that, but it's 3 a.m. somewhere, so I'll let it lie. And science, real science this time, ended up riding along in the strangest way. The vitamin, discovered and named in the 1910s and 20s, was everything the old cereal men had faked. An actual invisible substance in food that actually determined health. By the 1940s, when the government pushed enrichment of flour and cereals during the war, the industry embraced fortification with both arms, and I want you to appreciate the elegance of what that did. Spray a mist of laboratory vitamins onto a flake that is half sugar, and the side of the box may now print in perfect legal truth that the contents supply this and that share of a child's daily needs. The old trick, the box that talks like a doctor, hadn't died in that 1910 courtroom after all. It had simply gone to school. Post's copy said makes red blood and was a lie. The mid-century panel said fortified with 8 essential vitamins and was true, and both sentences did the identical job on the reader at the identical hour of the morning. They turned dessert back into medicine at the moment of purchase. A mother in 1955, reaching past the tiger to check the panel, read the one paragraph on the whole carton written for her, nodded, and put it in the cart. Everyone in that transaction behaved reasonably. That's what a mature trick looks like. It doesn't feel like a trick anymore. It feels like reading the label. So look at the finished machine standing complete by the mid-1950s, because we built every part of it tonight and we may as well admire the assembly. The child asks, because the tiger asked him. The mother agrees, because the panel reassured her and the stove stays cold, and the morning is 20 minutes shorter than her mother's was. The milk is there because the refrigerator hums. The dairy industry incidentally rode the cereal wave to glory without spending a nickel on it. Every box sold milk, an alliance nobody signed and everybody profited from. The grocer gives it all the eye-level shelf, the way his father gave it to the preachers in 1908, because the boxes turn over faster than anything else in the store. The television pays for the cartoons with profits, which raises the next crop of askers. Around it goes, morning after morning, a wheel with a 6-year-old at the top and 100 years of dead prophets and salesmen underneath, and not one person anywhere on the wheel. Not the child, not the mother, not the grocer, not even the ad man, needs to know a single thing we learned tonight for the wheel to turn. That's the difference between a scheme and a culture. A scheme needs schemers. A culture runs on its own weight. Somewhere between Danceville's windowsill and Columbus's television set, the scheme became a culture, and cultures don't get repealed. They just get inherited, which is why, tonight in your own kitchen, there is very probably a printed cardboard box of flaked or puffed or extruded grain, and why it seemed, until about 45 minutes ago, like the most natural object in the world. Now let's answer the question we came in with. All the way back at the start of the night, I promised you that Who Tricked Them has a real answer, with names. You've met everyone now. You've stood in the merchant's kitchen and the schoolteacher's plain room, at the clerk's counter, and inside the boys' Saturday. So let's lay the 3 answers out side by side, the way you'd lay out anything at the end of a long day, and see the whole thing at once, before we let it all go soft and dim. The first answer is a faith. Before anyone profited, somebody believed. Graham in his lecture halls, Jackson on his hillside, Ellen White with her Christmas vision, the little doctor in his white suit ringing bells over millionaires. These people were not in the main cynics. They looked at a country doubled over its own breakfast, pressing its hand below its ribs at 4 a.m, and they preached an answer they believed down to their shoes. That grain was purity, that the body was a temple, that breakfast was a moral act. They were wrong about a remarkable number of the details. The spices driving men mad, the sewer in the bowel, the yogurt at both ends. And yet they built something no advertiser could ever have built from scratch. They made food mean something. They forged the equation everything else ran on. Grain plus story equals price. The faith made the story. Without the Sands' 40 years of bells and testimony, C.W. Post would have had nothing to bottle. You cannot counterfeit a currency until somebody honest has minted it. The prophets minted it. The second answer is a salesman, and his is the name the title of this episode has been pointing at all night. C.W. Post took the faith and did to it precisely what he'd done to farm tools. Found the market, wrote the copy, named the price. He took the merchant's brown bottle, the fatherly engraved doctor, the mystery, the promise, and printed it flat onto a grain box. He invented the diseases, sold the cures, tucked the scripture in with the granules, and when a magazine and a jury finally measured his appendicitis claim out loud in 1910, the measuring changed the wording, and not the machine. He taught every consumer industry that followed, cigarettes, soap, automobiles, all of them tonight still, that you advertise the fear and let the product ride in afterward on the relief. If one man tricked America into the cereal aisle, it was Post. It says something for history's bookkeeping, though nothing comfortable, that the trick made him one of the richest men alive and never once reached the pain he'd actually built it from. The road to Wellville ran through every parlour in America and never passed his own door. And the third answer is a machine for making customers, which is the politest name I have for what the industry became once it discovered children. The signature that meant trust, the pinch of sugar that became half the box, the jingle that became the tiger, the cartoon bought and paid for so that the commercial could sit inside it like a pamphlet inside a grape nuts box. By 1955, the trick no longer needed a genius, an author, or even a villain. It needed a time slot. Plant the brand before 7, said the trade papers, and harvest for life. Of the three answers, this is the one that should sit least easily, because the first trick at least argued with adults, and adults can argue back. The third one simply arrived before the argument could form, singing, in a voice pitched perfectly for a 6-year-old alone with a screen, and it is the only one of the three still running tonight, essentially unmodified, on whatever glowing rectangle the 6-year-olds of this decade wake up to on Saturday. A faith, a salesman, and a machine. That's who. The faith made grain holy, the salesman made holiness purchasable, and the machine made the purchase hereditary. And the deepest thing the whole century proves is the thing I asked you to notice back at the Boston bread riot. At no point, not once, not for a single year between Sylvester Graham and Tony the Tiger, was any of this actually about breakfast. It was about sin, and then about health, and then about money, and then about time, and then about childhood itself. Breakfast was just the hour they all fought over. The one meal eaten every day, at home, first thing, before your defences are up, when you are hungriest and most creature and least on guard. The breakfast was never about breakfast. It was about you, at your most persuadable, every single morning forever. That's why the fight was worth 100 years. That's why the brightest aisle in the store is the one it is. As for how the people themselves came out, the real ones, the documented ones, history closed its ledger on each of them in turn, and you've heard most of it now. Dr. James Caleb Jackson died in 1895, his granular already outrun by the empires it seeded. Ellen White died in 1915, her church grown global. It thrives today, and its old health message, minus the era's strangeness, looks more respectable to modern medicine than almost anyone in 1866 would have bet. John Harvey Kellogg preached biologic living until December 1943, 91 years old, having operated, lectured and dictated to the last, his marble san already sold out from under him to the army. Will Keith Kellogg died in October 1951, also 91, nearly blind for his final decade, and the bookkeeper's last great entry deserves its own line. He'd already given the bulk of his fortune, tens of millions, one of the great philanthropies of the century, to a foundation for the health and education of children, which is still tonight one of the largest in the world. Make of that whatever you like. I make of it that the man spent 25 years being nobody, got everything, and decided at the end that the children the industry had learned to harvest deserved a trustee. Marjorie Merriweather Post ran her father's company into the General Foods colossus, filled a Florida estate called Mar-a-Lago with French porcelain, and died in 1973 one of the wealthiest women in America. Post City, Texas still stands on its dry plain, and Battle Creek, Michigan is still called Cereal City, still smells of toasted grain on the right wind, and still holds, in its old cemetery, both Kellogg brothers, a short walk apart, unreconciled, under the same Michigan snow every February since, and the borrowed eyes, the merchant, the schoolteacher, the hardware man, the kitchen girl at the frosted window, the clerk, the boy in the cowboy pajamas. They were never any one person, so history has no file on them. Whoever their originals were, and there were millions of originals, the record closed over them the way milk closes over flakes, quietly and completely. All they left was the habit. You'll handle it yourself in the morning in cardboard form. It's as close to a monument as people like them ever get, and tonight at least somebody counted them. That's worth something. That's what this channel is for. So that's the story. That's why there's a tiger on your groceries, and a signature, and a promise. Why the aisle glows. Why breakfast in America means what it means. Somebody decided. Now you know who, and when, and what it cost, and what it paid. And knowing it changes pleasantly little, which is the last gentle joke of the night. Tomorrow morning the bowl will still be there, and the box will still talk, and the flakes will still hiss down exactly the way they did for a 6-year-old in Ohio in 1955, and you're allowed to enjoy it. You're even allowed to drink the sweet milk at the bottom. 100 years of profits, salesmen and lawyers went into that last swallow. It's yours now. No one can trick you into what you already see clearly and choose anyway, with the light on. And with the whole machine laid out on the table and understood, there's nothing left for us to solve, which means the useful part of the night is over, and the good part can begin. Let it all start to power down now, piece by piece, the way a store goes dark after closing. First the far aisles, then the registers, then the sign. Because every place we visited tonight had a nighttime too. We only ever saw them at their loudest. The breakfast hour, the fire, the courtroom, the Saturday cartoons. But each of those rooms went quiet every single evening of its existence, the same way your room is going quiet now. And before we put the century away, I want to walk back through it once more, in the dark, when nothing is being sold and nothing is being argued and everyone we borrowed eyes from is asleep. Cincinnati, 1871, 11 o'clock on that same February Tuesday. The merchant's house has gone dark from the bottom up. Kitchen first, then parlour, then the lamp in the bedroom, turned down to a bead of orange and then to nothing. The stove that roared at 6 a.m. is banked now, its heat sunk to a deep, patient warmth you'd have to open the iron door to find. The city outside has stopped rumbling. The pork wagons stand empty in their yards. Even Porkopolis smells at this hour mostly of river and snow. And the merchant sleeps. The coal behind his breastbone has gone out, the way it always does by midnight, the way pain does when the body finally gets its way and lies still. The little brown bottle stands on the washstand in the dark, 1/3 empty, doing nothing, meaning nothing, just glass now. At 4 it will wake him, but 4 is hours away, and hours are long at night, and right now, in this moment, there is nothing wrong with him at all. There is just a man, warm under a quilt in a cold room, breathing slow. That much, at least, no era ever manages to complicate. Dansville, 1864, the same spring night we left the schoolteacher. The last bell rang long ago. The hillside establishment creaks and settles, timber by timber, the way big wooden buildings talk to themselves after dark. Down the corridor of plain rooms the guests sleep their prescribed sleep with their windows open, and the night air the rest of American medicine so dreads comes off the hills smelling of thawed earth and does them nothing but good. And on one window sill in one dark room the crockery bowl sits where you left it. The moon has moved across it by now. The milk has gone silver grey in the dark, and beneath the surface, slowly, all night, without effort, without witness, the hard little wheat rocks are giving up, softening. That's all the bowl is doing out there, patiently, hour by hour, becoming breakfast. There are worse images to fall asleep on than that one, something difficult, left alone in the dark, quietly becoming easy by morning. It's what nights are for. It's what this night is for. Let the bowl stand. It knows its work. Battle Creek, 1897, past midnight. The autumn the hardware man got well. The great San is dark along all its verandas. Somewhere on the upper floors, hundreds of the rescued rich are sleeping the enforced, unbuttered, thoroughly hydrated sleep of the biologic life, and their dyspepsia sleeps too. The little doctor in white is very possibly still awake. He averaged 5 hours and begrudged those, dictating some 50th chapter to an exhausted secretary in a pool of green lamplight. And in the business office below, past the treatment rooms gone silent, past the mechanical horse standing still as a museum piece in the dark, the bookkeeper is closing the day. You can hear the office at this distance of 1.25 centuries if you try. The scratch of the pen, the tick of the ledger pages, the small dry sounds of a man in his late 30s writing his unregarded name at the bottom of things, blotting it, turning the page. He will do this for 9 more years. Then he will do the other thing, and the name will not be unregarded again while grocery stores exist. But tonight he only finishes the column, carries the lamp to the door, and puts the office dark, and the Empire of Health floats on the Michigan night like a lit ship with all its lamps out, waiting for morning and the bells. Let it float. Even empires have to sleep. The grocery in Indiana, 1908, 9 in the evening. Shutters up, drawer counted, stove damped. The clerk got the shelf dusted before close, so the preachers stand in the dark in their neat rows, the signature, the bears, the sheaves of wheat, all still saying everything they say at full volume to absolutely nobody. That's the secret comedy of every store at night. The most insistent room in town, shouting claims into blackness until dawn. Cardboard doesn't tire, but it doesn't matter either, because there's no one to work on. A box can only talk if someone's listening, and the whole street has gone home to supper and bed. Eye level means nothing in the dark. The trick sleeps when you do. It always did. It's sleeping now. And the tract house outside Columbus, 1955, 10:30 on that October Saturday. The television has been off for hours. The screen that glowed all morning is a grey-green blank with the lamp reflected in it. And if you put your hand to the glass now, you'd find it cold. The cereal box stands closed in the cupboard, top flap tucked, tiger grinning into total darkness. And the boy's asleep the way only 6-year-olds sleep, flung diagonal, one sock on, cowboys on his flannel chest rising and falling, utterly spent by a day that cost him nothing and gave him everything. He is, at this hour, nobody's customer, nobody's demographic. The machine that owns his Saturday mornings has no purchase at all on his Saturday nights. No jingle ever written can follow a child past the edge of sleep. Whatever the century did to breakfast, it never laid a finger on this. Sleep stayed free. Sleep was the 1 hour of the American day that nobody ever figured out how to sell. And it is the hour you are entering now. So here you are then. Your own kitchen, tonight, wherever it is. Go stand in it one last time before we let go. You don't have to move. It comes to you. The room is dark. The refrigerator hums its one long patient note, the same note it will hold until morning. The tap holds a single drop and keeps it. And in the cupboard, or on the counter, or on top of the refrigerator, there is very probably a box, your box, whichever one it is, standing closed in the dark exactly like its ancestors stood in Indiana in 1908, saying its slogans to no one. You know everything about it now. You know the hillside and the windowsill it came from, the fire it survived, the brothers who went to court over it, the salesman who taught it to talk like a doctor, the pinch of sugar that ate it, the signature, the tiger, the 2 reclaimed hours it hands your household every week without being thanked. It is one of the most heavily engineered, heavily litigated, heavily believed in objects in your entire home, and tomorrow morning you will pick it up without one flicker of thought and shake it over a bowl, and it will hiss, and that will be that. This is the way of things, and honestly it's all right. Every ordinary object in every kitchen on earth is 100 years of somebody's fighting, gone quiet enough to hold in one hand. The spoon has its empires too. So does the clock. You can't carry the history of everything through every morning. You'd never get to work. You learn it once, on a night like this, and then you set it down gently, like a bowl on a sill, and let it soften back into just breakfast. Set it down now. Centuries will pass, you know. They always do. That's the one reliable thing about them. The aisle you shop will change beyond recognition. The way the barrels changed into boxes, and the boxes will change into whatever comes next. The tiger will retire someday, the way the elves and the bears and the fatherly engraved physicians all retire eventually into museums and nostalgia and old reels. The signatures will fade off the cardboard, and the cardboard itself will go the way of the crockery bowl and the coal stove and the water cure. But people will still wake up hungry, still shuffle to a kitchen in the half-light with their defences down, still reach for something easy, something familiar, something that asks nothing of them at the worst hour of the day, and somebody in whatever century it is will still be standing quietly on the other side of that reaching, having thought very hard about what their hand will find. Some things don't change. Morning doesn't change. The hungry, half-awake, trusting human at the start of the day doesn't change. You've been that human every morning of your life, and you'll be that human tomorrow, and there are worse things to be. It's the most ordinary thing you do. It connects you to every soul in this story. And tomorrow there will be mornings again, the whole apparatus of them. Tomorrow there will be alarms and cupboards, and the hiss of something into a bowl, yours or a child's or a stranger's in a kitchen you'll never see. Tomorrow the trucks will leave Battle Creek before dawn, the way they have every working morning for 120 years, riding the same rail lines the boomtown con men rode in on. Tomorrow the aisle will light up again, brightest in the store, and the boxes will resume their preaching to whoever walks past, and somewhere a 6-year-old will recite a script into a shopping cart, word perfect, the way 6-year-olds have since 1952. But that's tomorrow. That's all tomorrow. None of it can start without you, and you're going nowhere tonight. Right now, the whole machine is dark. The factories humming on their night shifts far away, the stores locked, the tigers silent, the signatures illegible in unlit cupboards from one coast to the other. Right now, there's just this room, and this bed, and you. And you're all right, you know. Whatever the day did to you, whatever tomorrow wants, right now you're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof, and a bed, and a morning waiting that will take care of itself the way mornings do. More easily, in fact, than any morning in this whole long story, because the fire is laid for you, the water hauled, the grain softened, the milk cold, and none of it will cost you a single hour at a stove in the dark. 200 years of other people's mornings, prophets and bookkeepers and kitchen girls and mothers, all pressed down and folded into the ease of yours. You could feel guilty about that, but don't. They'd have traded with you in a heartbeat, every last one of them. And anyway, gratitude makes a better pillow. You have more ease than the merchant, more time than the cook, more knowledge than the railroad man's wife, and no bell, hear that, no bell of any kind coming for you at 5. That's more than almost anybody in this story ever had. That's enough. It really is enough. So let the century go, era by era, the way we found it. Let the merchant sleep in Cincinnati, his coal gone dark till 4. Let the school teacher sleep at Dansville with her window open and her bowl on the sill, doing its slow, faithful work. Let the hardware man sleep off his 15th glass of water in the great white ship of the Seine, and the kitchen girl sleep in her boarding house with the frost feathering back over the window glass, the orange sky long gone, everything rebuilt, everything forgiven by time if not by the brothers. Let the clerk sleep behind the store in Indiana, and the boy in Columbus diagonal and dreamless, one sock on, safe from every tiger. Let the doctor put down his dictation at last, and the bookkeeper close his ledger, and even the salesman, and even him let him rest too, somewhere past the reach of the copy in the courtrooms and the darkness that no product ever touched. History has them all now. History is a deep, still shelf, and everyone on it sleeps at eye level, and nobody is selling anything anymore, and let sleep come for you the same way it came for all of them, on every one of those 100,000 vanished nights, the same as it came to the attic rooms and the plain rooms and the tract houses, the same as it came before the boxes, the same as it will come after them. It doesn't need to be earned tonight. You've done your part. You listened all the way to the quiet. Let the bed hold your whole weight now. You can stop holding any of it yourself. Let your breath find the pace it wants, the slow one, the one it keeps for exactly this hour. Let the room's small sounds, the hum, the settle, the tick, carry on without your supervision, the way the night shift always has. Let your thoughts loosen like flakes in milk, softening at the edges, losing their shape, going from crisp to gentle to nothing in particular. Let the last of the century drain out of them, the bells fading first, then the fire glow, then the courtroom voices, then the jingles, until all that's left is a dark kitchen, a humming refrigerator, a closed box keeping its silence till morning, and a bowl somewhere. Waiting on a sill in 1864, almost soft now, almost ready, almost morning, but not yet. Not for a long, easy while yet. And if your mind still wants something to hold as it goes under, minds do. It's the last habit they surrender. Give it the mornings to count. Not sheep, mornings. There are so many of them stacked up behind tonight, and they count beautifully, because every one of them ended. Count the merchant's morning, February 1871, steak and fire in the little brown bottle. Over now, a century and a half over, quiet as the bottom of a lake. Count the schoolteacher's morning, spring 1864, the softened granular spooned up at last after its long night on the sill. Over, and the sill itself gone, and the hillside green over all of it. Count the hardware man's morning of bells and baths and chewing songs. Over! The kitchen girl's morning after the fire when the snow around the black ruin steamed and the whole town came out to look. Over. Even that one. Over. Rebuilt. Resolved. Filed away. The clerk's grey October morning. The railroad wife's 15 cents. The wink at the grocer. The courtroom morning in 1910 when a trick got named out loud. Over. 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 The boy's Saturday, the hiss of the flakes, the tiger warm in the grey-blue light. Over nearly 70 years now, and the boy, wherever life took him, is somebody's grandfather or somebody's memory, and either way his Saturday kept. They all kept. That's what mornings do once you're done with them. They stop needing anything from you at all. Not one of those mornings can ask you a single question anymore, and tomorrow's can't either. Not yet, not for hours, not until it's actually here, and by then you'll be rested and it will be easy. Easier than any morning in this whole story. 8 seconds and a hiss and done. So count them slower now. 1871, 1864, 1897, 1908, 1955. Feel how each number is heavier and softer than the last, like plates being put away in a padded drawer, one at a time by someone careful. Somewhere in the counting you'll lose your place, and that's not a mistake. That's the door. You don't have to find your place again. The numbers know their order without you. The century knows its own way home. Everything tonight has somewhere to be. The milk in the cold, the box in the dark, the bells in the past, the tiger in his cardboard, the brothers under the snow, the trucks on the rails, the moon on a windowsill in New York State, sliding slow across a bowl that will be perfect by morning. Nothing is lost. Nothing needs watching. The whole 160 years is tucked in, every era in its own bed, and the last one awake in the entire story, the very last one, is you. So put the light out on it. Not all at once, the way the store does it. Far aisles first. There go the prophets dimming gently, Graham and Jackson and the hillside, their argument finally mercifully adjourned. Then the middle of the store. The sands' long verandas going dark, window by window, the ledgers closing, the factory sinking to their night hum. Then the registers, post-copy fading grey, the courtroom emptying, the signatures resting. Then the front of the store, the bright aisle itself, shelf by shelf from the top down, the tigers and bears and elves closing their printed eyes as the fixtures tick cool in the dark. And then the sign over the door, the last light in the lot humming once and letting go. You can go now too. The story will keep. It kept for 160 years. It will keep till breakfast. Sleep well, whoever you are. You're part of the story, you know. The last chapter. The one still being lived. the one nobody gets to write copy for while you're sleeping. Good night.